I'm here today with John Tooby, and we're talking a little bit about the history of our field, history of HBES, and a little bit about John's role in all of these things. So I want to start with a question for you. In what discipline did you earn your doctorate?
I'm pretty undisciplined. So technically speaking, my master's degree is in behavioral biology and my PhD is in anthropology. I was experimental psychology as an undergraduate, and I actually wanted to go ahead and sort of, this was before there was anything, I wanted to go to graduate school in psychology and develop evolutionary approaches. And so I would go and I would broach that topic with various people at various universities, and they sort of said, to a greater or lesser degree, get out of here, you monster. Okay. And I was actually coming out of high school, I was interested in applying evolution to understanding the human behavior and the human mind. But I thought, I was convinced I was going to be a physicist, and I thought this would be something I did on the side. And but freshman year, it was sort of height of the anti-war movement, and which I was active in, and physics started to seem less relevant. And also I went and I thought, well, surely psychology must have a lot of evolution in it. And so I started to take psychology courses, and I was astounded then, as I am to this very day, that all psychology isn't psychology, but they had never heard of it. And but anyway, so I set about equipping myself. So I took some, computer science and various kinds of biology and a bunch of different things while majoring in psychology. And I thought, well, I have to know primate behavior. And I went into a course taught by Irvin DeVore. And the teaching fellows were Steve Gollin and Sarah Hurdy and Bob Trivers, and he wasn't exactly a teaching fellow, but he was on that level there. And a whole community of really brilliant, interesting people. And so I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And I still wanted to do the psychology part, but they had a lot of the active biology of behavior, evolutionary biology perspective that was great. But I thought I was alone on Earth, and then all of a sudden there are these, it is a really fantastic, brilliant group of people. And Ed Wilson would sort of lurk in the distance, but the kind of local ecology was that Ed really locked his door and wrote books and didn't talk to anybody. And even his students, the active research seminar every week at Harvard was with Irv. Anyway, so I told him after several years of going to his house and drinking with him until he and I would pass out at 4 a.m. I told him my grief about not being able to find a psychology program. And he said, well, come work with me. I'll let you do whatever you want. And that sounded great. And I didn't quite realize that I was making a lifelong commitment to being an anthropologist. Not that I have anything against anthropologists, but it was not really my total orientation. And also I abused Irv because I actually didn't do all that much of the evolutionary psychology because I got interested in really fundamental biological questions like intergenomic conflict, and my dissertation was on the parasite theory of the evolution of sex, and which is sort of unheard of in anthropology department. And but anyway, but he was very accommodating, and in all my other sort of psychology projects and so on. So anyway, I have a PhD as an anthropologist. I had a terrible time getting a job. Was unemployed for 5 years, and
you were a very untraditional anthropologist.
Exactly. Everything I said offended everybody I talked to, and but that gave me a healthy distance, so I could be not all invested in protecting existing ideologies.
So when you think about those early ideas, one of the things that some people say is that there was a certain amount of intellectual isolation Did you feel that, or did you feel because you had come out of Irv's group and that sort of place that you didn't have that kind of isolation and maybe only felt that maybe when you were looking for a job?
Well, I don't know. There was like 3 years of, I mean, I felt pretty isolated first several years before I ran into the DeVore group. And then even after, I mean, it was a nice social community, and it supplied all my needs as far as evolutionary biology was concerned. It wasn't, at that time in the sort of history of sociobiology, they didn't have the idea of information processing regulation of behavior. Okay. It was just a kind of, this is selected for, so therefore that will happen, and not what's the adaptation. So the George Williams part of it was not really a big part of sociobiology, that adaptations have, actual structure. They evolve given a sort of selected history and a particular adaptive problem, and you would sort of then add that to a kind of a computational approach, which was rising up with cognitive science. That was tremendously exciting, except they were completely uninterested in evolution. They thought everything happened according to general learning, and so I had friends who were sort of into information theory and computation, and I had friends who were into evolution, but not information theory and computation, and so and things like Bob Trivers, he would get up in front of a class and say that the central dogma is that all organisms will be acting so as to maximize their inclusive fitness, and I tried to talk to him about how that wasn't really what an evolutionary approach said, and he was resistant. So I didn't feel like, I have overwhelming affection and respect for the evolutionary biology community at Harvard at the time, absolutely. But it wasn't, and that's to the extent that I felt sort of a close comradeship, it was with that group. But I still felt there was some isolation. It wasn't until I met Leda that we, and then we were sort of a community of two for a while, right? So, for not me, a while, the rest of my life. Too.
When you think about those early days, who do you think were your key supporters, other than Leda?
Okay. Before Irv, there was nobody, and so I would have to be careful what I said. Well, that's still true anyway, but if people knew what I really thought about everything, I would have been lynched long ago. Anyway, and then after Irv was a key supporter. He was absolutely indispensable, and for everybody else too. It wasn't just for me. He was the only active. People might quibble, but in terms of the total amount of faculty attention and support for people interested in evolution and behavior, it was 97% Irv, and the community. So I really, the lab Leda and I run is really a continuation of Irv's simian seminar in terms of a lot of things.
What kind of obstacles did you encounter then, sort of in pursuing your evolutionary informed research?
Nobody wanted to let me into graduate school, and
it's a pretty big one. People
would call me a Nazi, and I'm perhaps, I noticed that matters to a lot of people. I mean, I didn't like it, but I know, I bet you there'd be hundreds of people in the field who were, most people are more sensitive to, even Leda, she will get upset for a long time over some remark or pointed thing. And
you have a little thicker skin.
I have a thicker skin, and I also have so with Frank Sulloway's work, I'm the youngest of four brothers, and so I get more determined. I tell Leda,
more feisty.
The fact that people are, criticizing this and should have caught on long ago, that means we're playing some important function, right?
Sure.
But she doesn't feel that, and you get discouraged every once in a while by it. I remember Steve Gollin before we managed to snag him for UCSB. Anyway, he was passing through as a friend, and he was my office mate at when I went to graduate school.
Okay.
It was his last year with Irv and my first year, and but we would talk, and so we thought the whole evolutionary biology revolution would take over the social sciences, and we were pessimistic, so we were thinking 15 years. So anyway, 30 years later, we're recalling this time, and we just go into gales of laughter because it's not that the revolution hasn't happened with like the HBES community and so on, but in terms of the arguments are so basic and straightforward that you would think that their spread would have been a lot faster.
Yeah, I think some of it perhaps is true to the idea that science progresses with the death. Of
exactly
the other side in that thing.
So no, I mean I tell that to all my students, the Max Planck quote that science progresses funeral by funeral, and those are physicists, right? They're supposed to be.
They're supposed to be much more objective about everything. Right. Which ones of your contributions do you think have had the biggest impact on the field?
Well, first of all, that assumes that I've made contributions. But anyway...
everybody else thinks you've made big contributions.
Yeah, it kind of puzzles me. Because I really think of what I've done so far was it's 5% of what I intended to do. I'm just sort of,
getting
28
started.
and getting started, right? So I take life extension mix because things happen slower than I anticipate. Which of my contributions were most influential? I think not giving up. Is because people would sidle up to me and they'd say, "Really great what you're doing," and I think it made it more permissible. I think if I had to name one paper, I would say it would be the Psychological Foundations of Culture, because that was sort of
I read it as a graduate student.
that was sort of a rant that I'd saved up from the time I was 17 or 18. And we should have made it a book rather than long. So, because I've learned is that if you write a 2-page paper, people learn one thing from it. And if you write a 120-page paper, people learn one thing from it. And so,
there's some truth to that, I think. Yes. Which of your contributions did you expect would have a greater impact than it has? Is there anything that you think should have had a bigger role than it has?
Yeah, there are. I mean. So you get tired of saying, so you write your piece on one kind of issue and, then you're asked to write 77 new versions of it, and that's very tiresome. And so, but there are things that critics don't address or assimilate, and you're tired of saying it over again because if they didn't bother with it the first time? And but the issue, I guess I wish we had developed the paper on reconciling human universality with the uniqueness of the individual, because there's a lot of things that for length, I mean, I understand completely. David Buss we didn't have the length. He liked them, but we didn't have the right length. He was editing a special issue, and so again, there's even a small book. There's all sorts of very principled theories of individual differences that are adaptationist, and then there's the whole genetic noise, sex and parasite story, and so we still get people who think that some things are genetic and some things are not genetic. Natural selection only applies to things that are genetic. And,
So, sort of in line with that, is there any particular paper or book that you would write or handle differently if you had the opportunity to do it again?
Yeah, almost everything. So I guess if I had to do over again, we would just have written The Adapted Mind ourselves. Not that there aren't fantastic contributions and that people are great, but the total amount of work of so we had to rewrite a huge number of the chapters and the extremely sensitive negotiation with the people about that, and A and B, it was like 8 times as much work as just to write it yourself without the whole social component. And then especially sort of the selection pressures, then the adaptation, and then the cultural effects. People have really forgotten that the title of the book's Adapted Mind and the generation of culture, because there's a whole different theory of culture. I mean, we didn't have time to really develop the theory of culture in it. So like in the Psychological Foundations of Culture, which has the word culture in it, to people just about psychology, at the end they say, well, this is not a theory of culture because it wasn't meant to be, but it's sort of the framework for one. And we'd gone on and actually written, if it had been our book, we'd written a big section on how it really changes how you approach culture. I don't know, a lot of things. So almost every paper, there's lots of things which didn't get published. I mean, we had a lot of trouble getting published in the early years, and so that it was like 4 years between the time that the social exchange experiments that they were published, and it was, we did stuff on frequencies of data format, which people appear to be much more rational and have all adapted for probabilistic problems as you would expect them to be if you give the information in the right format, and that took us 5 years to be published. So there's lots of things where we just didn't have the energy to go back, or or wasn't the proper journals for these things. So they lie around. So again, it's just the tip of the iceberg what's out there. It's a haphazard tip of the iceberg what's actually there.
Okay. What, if anything, has surprised you about the evolution of HBES itself in these past 25 years? Anything that's been surprising?
People are so complicated that I don't have a lot of expectations. There's the part of your mind that says people should be rational, and therefore all psychology and anthropology would be evolutionarily founded, and that clearly wasn't true. I've been pleased with its evolution, and I don't. I mean, I am the people who come. I mean, there's a lot of really first-class science that's happening here, and it's. I think it for everyone. So people look. I remember I would look. When Leda and I were just the only people at UCSB, really. I mean, with Don Simons was there, but he went emeritus, and
he did his own thing
too. But in terms of actual people doing active empirical work at the time, people would say UCSB must be some great place to be, and it certainly was great. But we'd look at Michigan, where there was Hamilton and Richard Wrangham and Bill, just this huge community of interesting people. And then you go exactly. And then you go there, and the people would be not so happy and kind of feuding, and so everything looks better from a distance.
That's true. Grass is always greener.
And but here I think HBES is really important because people come, and here instead of being fairly isolated and norm violators, outlaws at their home institutions, they come here, and there's a sort of bunch of comrades who understand and support, and I think I always get really excited when I come to HBES, and I feel energized for a long time before the home environment grinds you down. So I think it has I think the thing which is extremely pleasing is the new generations of students who then, I'm amazed at, I think about our students, not to pick, they just come to mind, but that they're now, some are tenured, and they have their own research labs, and they're producing graduate students, and it's like, not that I plan to retire, but it's so great to sit in an audience. This is more at other conferences than at HBES, but and somebody will be doing some fairly uninformed thing, and you think, do I really want to say something critical? I really don't like that role, but I used to have to play it all the time. And then one of my students will raise their hands, and they'll say better answer than I, or better question than I, or better comment than I would have been able to articulate myself on the spur of the moment. And then I say, I can relax.
What kinds of directions do you hope that HBES and the researchers that are at HBES pursue in the future? Are there any particular directions that you'd like to see?
Every direction.
Everywhere.
It's a meta theory for everything, and everything in humans and behavior, right? And there's a kind of time budget problem, which is that people in existing communities that have their home conference they need to go to every year, and that kind of exhausts their university funding and their time. And so cognitive development, so people here are really, so cognitive development, people have their cognitive development conferences, and the economists have their, and their social psychologists have their things. And so I've always been hoping that we get more and more people who are not initially part of the HBES community, but larger communities, the other things, would be excited to come here. And that hasn't just happened as much as some of it's happened, but it's, I think it's, people are, evolution is a contaminant. Okay, it's makes you dangerous. Yes. It makes you possibly a holder of, incorrect belief, and it's just safer to stay away from it. And so people are extremely, and so a thing which has surprised me. I used to think of when I was 20, I thought of science as sort of like, you publish a paper or something, the stars are out, you see the paper, everybody sees the paper and they assimilate it, okay, and then they rationally move ahead based on that knowledge. And now I see it as science is a collection of, villages of 80 people, and in an impenetrable jungle with these little footpaths, and people know a little bit about the village next to them. Okay, so we have neuroscientists who have millions of dollars in funding and are still going off of psychological models which are 30 or 40 years out of date. And it's not that they're stupid, and it's not that they're bad people. It's just that everything works by local communication. And so training graduate students is just a really important thing, because it's one of the few ways. It's not the only way. There's one of the big surprises is really smart people will overcome this and gravitate and so on. But anyway, so there's, yeah.
Okay. Thinking about the pioneers of the field who aren't with us anymore, so people like Bill Hamilton and Linda Mealy, Dev Singh, Margot Wilson, is there anything that you'd like to share about them that might not be common knowledge to newer members of the field?
I'm unfortunately lesioned in my anecdote area of my brain. But
perhaps for safety reasons?
That's also true. The things that come to mind are not always things I can say. But no, it's an upsetting thing about getting older is that, a person I was closest to was Margot, and I feel that loss bitterly. And she was, a friend from the very early days, and 78 or something, and back when they were sort of,
just starting out.
Yeah, exactly. And and we would meet at their Deep Canyon research site and plot the future. And
conquest of the universe.
Exactly. And of course I meet Miss Bill Hamilton, and George Williams was, he was personally important to me. He was very kind. John Maynard Smith, I would put there. So he was the reviewer on both of our papers in evolutionary biology on proposing the parasite theory of sex, and but he was also just really warm. And the one thing which Harvard didn't do, which you'd think or Irv didn't do, is because he'd never done it himself, is how do you get hired? And I didn't even think about it. I thought you just think, you do science and something happens mysteriously. And so, but George was very, obviously his intellectual impact is just all over our work, and but his personal kindness. And so I'd come up to him and I'd talk about, I remember this, and we want to talk science. And he said, "Wait, you have a job?" He stopped me. "You have a job at UCSB?" And I realize that I now have experienced that moment from the other side, which is you really have this parental feeling about the younger student or younger people coming along and wanting to get them situated and fed regularly and stuff like that. And
all of that parental investment.
Exactly.
Going on.
And they're not exactly aware of it, maybe, but yeah, it's because then I feel it's because here they want to talk science and I'm talking how to get hired, and that seems really careerist. It's just like not what people should be doing anyways.
But very important nonetheless in that greater sense of things. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.